Shalom, brothers and sisters who are scattered in all corners of the earth. Sanbonan, my name is Mpumelelo. Welcome to this channel. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for all your contributions and thank you for your support. If you are new to this channel, please consider to subscribe, like this video, hit the notification bell, and share this video with your friends and family. So, what are we looking at today? Today we're continuing with the subject that we've been discussing in the past weeks, revealing the true biblical land of Canaan, the promised land. This is part 3 of that video. I would like to advise someone who's seeing this material for the first time, I'd like to advise that you also watch part 1 and part 2. And I'm saying this because some people don't have the patience, I know, of listening to the whole video. But it's also the people who will ask questions sometimes. And they would ask questions, and evidently in their question, it is clear that they have not watched the video, because they start making assumptions that I did not say. So please, I welcome contributions. They make this video and all the contributions, because many of us learn from the comments that are made by other people, but it is only fair that as we watch, we ask questions based on what we saw, not on what other people said. So I appeal that we also, watch the first and the second and see if there's any consistency with what I've said in the beginning of this presentation. That is from the first and the second video. So we're going to look at why modern Israel is not the promised land, and why is it that it makes sense? When you read and when you follow events, they appear as if those are biblical events, of events that have taken place in the promised land. We cannot escape certain questions that are asked by people. And these are the questions that I personally asked when I believed that modern Israel is the promised land. Among other questions is that there's evidence of Roman and Greek occupation of that land, the Levant, which today part of it is called the modern state of Israel. There's evidence that there was occupation there. There's evidence that during the reign of King Herod the Great, after the construction of the second temple, he renovated it, extending the outer perimeters, which other people believe that they are the remnants of the second temple. I used to believe that those are the remnants of the second temple. I don't know whether they are or not. But I'm persuaded that something else happened that makes us believe that modern state of Israel is the promised land. So we have to answer those questions. We have to answer questions about the ruins of all the buildings that King Herod built during his era. And those remnants are still there. So this history is mixed with the history of Judea, because that place has become known as Judea. But how did it come about? How did it come about that that area became convincingly known as the state of Israel, or even the future state of Israel? How did we become to believe that when we are gathered in the final analysis, we will be gathered and be restored to that land? There's a lot of things that we have taken for granted, we have read without understanding, and not because we lack understanding, but because we trusted in what is written. Sometimes we have not read critically. For instance, one of the things that I personally omitted is to understand, is to realize that the Nile is in the continent, and the Bible constantly talks about the Nile. Perhaps what is confusing is that we are not told in the Bible that the Nile and the Gihon is the same thing. So when they, in other texts, in other scriptures, when they talk about the Gihon, we think they're talking about a river that is unknown to us, which is in Jerusalem. And yet the Gihon is right here. The Gihon and the Nile means the same thing. It's the same thing. The Nile, as I explained last week, or in the last video, the Nile simply means, it is a Greek word for Gihon, and it is also known as Gihono in the language spoken in Kenya, in Swahili. And these are the languages we believe that are the true biblical languages that were used, but they were distorted and they are today called Hebrew. Not only the land was stolen from us, or an identity was taken from us, but our languages were given a new meaning. But we will get to that in other videos and unpack all these things. But as I said, we can't avoid discussing all these things that happened in that land, and we are told they happened in Judea. But let us look at how the Jewish state of Israel came to be. Many people know it, but some people, for the benefit of those who don't know it, how the state of Israel came to be, let's talk about it. It started with the desire by the Zionists to create a homeland for the Jewish people, the Ashkenazi people. This is what I'm talking about. The Jewish people or the Ashkenazi people. In any case, I think we should have an understanding that there's a distinction between the Yahudim and the Jewish people. We are not talking about the same people. We are talking about people who've taken our identity and they call themselves the Jews today. So it started with a scheme which was called the Uganda Scheme. In 1903, the British colonial government offered the Zionist founder, Theodore Herzl, land in Western Kenya to settle the Ashkenazi Jews. So Theodore Herzl and the Zionist movement have always had the desire to have a homeland for all the Jewish people who are found all over the place in Europe. And in their discussion with the British agreed with them. The British had control over Eastern Kenya at that time, agreed to give them the land in Western Kenya, so that they settle there, and so that land becomes their homeland. The decision was eventually overturned on the grounds of impracticability, and this was done in favor of a land in Palestine. Now, what does impracticability? It means it was impractical for them to settle in Kenya. Why was it impractical? Probably because they are white people. If they are going to have a land in the center of the continent of Africa, it was going to be very clear that they stole it. Just like the white people in South Africa today, who are the descendants of the Dutch and the British, and they formed a state, an apartheid state, And they are now settled and they call it their motherland or their fatherland. So it would have resulted the same way, but it would have been worse. What you see today in the Middle East, the war between Israel, Gaza, Syria, and it has now spilled over to other neighboring countries, Iran, the same thing was going to happen here. If the Ashkenazi Jews were granted permission to establish a homeland in Western Kenya, their presence was going to be felt violently by the surrounding people there. Uganda, Congo, Tanzania perhaps, because they were going to usurp all of it. Now, if they knew that the promised land is in the Middle East, why did they choose Kenya instead? Did they know something that the world did not know? You can't just choose a country in the middle of nowhere. So they chose Western Kenya. They knew something about it. Let's park that idea for a bit and get to what subsequently happened when they couldn't get the land in 1903. Around 1903, they had already started to plant trees in that desert so that the desert resembles the description of biblical events. The land flowing of milk and honey, a rich land, a prosperous land. So they needed to plant a forest to make it look like it's a forested country. I indicated in the first video that by 1948 they had planted over 230 million trees. So they have transformed that desert and make it look like a land of milk and honey. But in actual fact, there's nothing that is natural that sustains them there. They have to genetically modify their foods because certain things don't grow in the desert. So they have to modify them, modify their seeds. Something that we don't do, it is done today. And a lot of us were not even aware that our food has been infiltrated because to certain people, profit comes first. So they have altered the natural being, even of the crops and the seeds that we grow, we plant. Now, it made perfect sense that, they could not get the land in Western Kenya. And so they looked at another alternative. And that alternative was Palestine. 1917, after the war, the British government decided to endorse the settlement of a Jewish home in Palestine. Now, mind you, in Palestine, there were people living there. There were Ashkenazi Jews who lived there as well. And they started living there around the 1800s, 1880, 1888. They started living there. That's why they were able to sponsor a project to plant trees around 1990. Around 1903. So this project, they began to focus on Palestine, because Palestine, as I would explain later, would resemble their aspirations and would also be a mirror image of the real Israel and real Jerusalem. So the British government decided to endorse the establishment of a Jewish home in Palestine after discussion with the cabinet and consultations with the Jewish leaders. They did not consult the Palestinians who lived there. They were discussing among themselves to give land to the Jewish Ashkenazi, to the Ashkenazi Jews, sidelining the Palestinians. The decision was made public in a letter from British Foreign Secretary Lord Arthur James Balfour. And Lord Arthur James Balfour wrote a letter to Lord Walter Rothschild. The contents of that letter is as follows. Dear Lord Rothschilds, if you don't know anything about the Rothschilds, you need to read about them. They made things possible for the modern state of Israel to happen, to look the way it looks. They changed things. They financed it. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty Government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's Government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political states enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So the establishment of this homeland was not supposed to prejudice the people who lived, the Palestinians in particular, who lived in Palestine at that time. But what happened? What happened? In 1948, okay, let me back up a bit. In 1917, the Ottoman Empire crumbled after the war. So the British was given the mandate to oversee Palestine and other places. So the League of Nations gave Britain the mandate to be the administrative, what do you call it? So in perhaps in different ways, Palestine became a sub-province of Britain. They had the mandate to administer the affairs of the people of Palestine after taking over from the Ottoman Empire. So the British mandate was going to end in 1948. And when that mandate ended, the Ashkenazi Jews immediately took control of Palestine. So, on the day the British mandate over Palestine expired, this was on Friday, May the 14th, 1948, the Jewish People's Council gathered at Tel Aviv Museum to declare the establishment of the State of Israel. David, at that time he was known as David Grun, David Ben-Gurion, created the council with representatives from a broad swathe of the Yishuv. So a Yishuv is the community of people who lived in Palestine, including their rivals. They were all required to Hebraicize their names. Now this is interesting. Why were they required to Hebraicize their names? Because they are Germans, they are Russians, they are Polish. They come from all over the place in Europe, but they were required to change their names to sound Hebrew. David Grun, who became the first prime minister, changed his name and he became David Ben-Gurion. Golda Meirson became Golda Meir. Even Benjamin Netanyahu, he was not Benjamin Netanyahu. So they changed the name to sound Hebrew. Now, it is important to note, this is very important to note, that the establishment of that Jewish state did not come about as a result of a fulfillment of any prophecy. The fulfillment of that prophecy will be realized when the children of Israel are gathered and restored to the promised land. We are still in captivity. We are witness to that prophecy. It has not materialized. That's why people are so confused. They even believe that we are in the new covenant because Christianity has confused them and the New Testament has corrupted our minds. Can't think straight. Even if we read, we want to believe what's in our heads. That state, Jewish state of Israel, was not established as a result of the fulfillment of prophecy. If it was as a result of the fulfillment of prophecy, we would have seen the unification of two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, under one king who is a descendant of David. That has not happened. We would have seen the establishment or the creation of the third temple. It has not happened. We would have seen peace throughout the world. That has not happened. That is not the modern state that is not the promised land. But what happened? Why is that modern state of Israel resembles the real Israel that we read about in the Bible? And why are we persuaded in saying that we are in the promised land? And that there is not the promised land. Unfortunately, you have to read extra biblical material to link these situations. When you read Josephus Flavius, who, by the way, is the only one who writes about the events that took place after the building of the Second Temple. Other writers are found in the books of Maccabees 1, 2, 3, and 4. But it is interesting what is happening in that book because other people believe that the fourth book of the Maccabees was written by Josephus. Josephus is believed to have written quite a lot of things, including the New Testament. Nevertheless, in book 13 of his book, The Antiquities of the Jews, he talks about a certain Onias, who was a high priest in the real Jerusalem. And when there was a squabble amongst the priests, the high priests, he left the real Jerusalem and went to Egypt. He had a good relationship with the Ptolemy of Egypt. The Ptolemy dynasty was a dynasty which gained popularity after the death of Alexander the Great. So this Ptolemy was Ptolemy the sixth, and he was the Pharaoh of Egypt. So Onias was a good friend of Ptolemy, and he went to Egypt and asked for a piece of land where he could build a temple. Ptolemy gave him a temple in a place known as Nomus of Heliopolis. This place is unknown today. Some people say it is close to Cairo. Some people say that its ruins cannot be found today. And those people who say that, by the way, are the Ashkenazi Jews. But that place, personally, I believe it is the Levant. It is where the Jewish state of Israel is. Why do I believe that? Egypt at that time was quite a big empire. And the Greeks when the Greeks took over, they took over all other provinces that were controlled by Egypt. This included the Sinai Peninsula, and the Sinai Peninsula extend to the modern state of Israel. Now, this Onias, built a temple. But not only did he build a temple, according to Josephus Flavius, he built a temple resembling the real Jerusalem. And he didn't stop there. He also built a city that looks just the same as Jerusalem and its neighboring, the city and the temple. Now, what happened here was that a duplicate of the real Jerusalem was created elsewhere in Egypt. It resembled the same Jerusalem, and the cities resembled the same city. It means where you have a place called Judea, you had it there. Sea of Galilee, you had it there. And we will discuss later on how all those cities can be found in the continent. Some of those places are still called by their original names. Now it explains when there was a temple built which resembled the real temple and a city built, it explains why we have a duplicate which has confused the entire world. Those who have resources to do deeper researches, please go ahead and assist us in finding out the truth. When you look at the maps today, they will tell you that this Nomus Heliopolis is close to Cairo. But just as they have moved everything around and renamed things, it is possible that this temple is the same temple that King Herod extended. It is the same place that King Herod built all the things that he built. Why? Because after Onias built this temple, some Jews went and lived in this city which is called Jerusalem. They went there and lived there. The descendants of some of these Jews are the Jews which translated the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, into Greek. Because during the reign of Alexander the Great, all provinces that he defeated, all areas that he conquered, he forced people to speak and adopt the Greek culture. So the Jews that lived in Jerusalem, the Jews that lived in Egypt and the surrounding areas were fluent in Greek. And so Ptolemy the second, this Ptolemy that allowed Onias to build a temple was Ptolemy the sixth. So Ptolemy the second commissioned the translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, because he had built a big library which is known today as the Library of Alexandria, which burned down during the reign of Julius Caesar. But he commissioned this work so that he can have in his library Hebrew scriptures translated into Greek. That is why we have today the Septuagint. The Septuagint Bible is a result of that translation by Hebrews from Hebrew to Greek. But there's something about the Septuagint that is misleading. The Septuagint means 70. That's why that Bible was called the Septuagint. Septuagint means 70. But Ptolemy II requested the assistance from the Hebrews, 6 elders from each tribe, to come and translate the Hebrew scriptures. You will realize that if it is 6 from each tribe, it means the number became 72. But it was called nevertheless Septuagint, as if there were 70. But what is misleading here, it's not that there were 72 and they were called the Septuagint. No. What is misleading is that subsequent to their translation of the Bible, of the Torah in particular, everything else that was translated later into Greek was called Septuagint. Jerome, who was the secretary to the Pope, translated the rest of the Bible from Hebrew to Greek, and then the whole Bible now is called the Septuagint. With every translation from original text to a translated version, there's bound to be changes in meaning of certain things because languages are not the same. So, when that duplicate temple and the duplicate city was created, the language became known. That place became known with the period of time. That place became known as Judea. That is why you never hear of anything about the northern kingdom. And when you read the scriptures, the Torah, or the Old Testament, or the Tanakh, you don't get to know anything about the destruction of the temple. There's nothing that is mentioned about the destruction of the second temple. There's not even a prophecy about the destruction of the second temple. Other people believe that Daniel 9 talks about the destruction of the second temple. But there's confusion there because this temple that was built by Onias, we are made to believe that it was destroyed in 73 CE. But why is it significant? There were many other temples that were created, but this one is known. It is known when it was built, and it is known when it was destroyed. We are told that it lasted for over 343. Some argue that it lasted 242 years. It almost overlaps with the building of the second temple by Nehemiah and Ezra. There's almost an overlap. When you read the Tanakh ends with the book of the Chronicles, not the book of Malachi, as it has been distorted in the chronology of the Old Testament in the translated versions. When you read it in the Tanakh, it ends with the book of Chronicles. But before the book of Chronicles, it is Ezra and Nehemiah. So the translation, not only something was done to the translation of the Bible, the chronology was also mixed up, so that when you read the book of Malachi, you think it flows immediately with Matthew. But it doesn't. It is the play of our minds, the distortion of facts. So, this was the duplicate of things. And it creates a reasonable explanation why we think that the modern state of Israel is the promised land. And we will read past every clue that we get that says the Nile was the border of the promised land. We will read past that because that is the clue. The Nile is in the continent of Africa. But we won't read it. And as we will discuss further on, we will point out at some of the places that are still called by the names resembling the biblical names. There are still people who are called by the names resembling the biblical names. And we can also prove that the language that we speak is actually the true biblical language. It has evolved, it has adapted, but it can be traced back. This is the task that we have. This is the research that we should focus on. We have a lot of work ahead. So, I would like to hear from you. We're going to stay on this topic for quite some time. And by the mercies and the grace of the Most High, we hope that more is revealed. I'm going to end this presentation here today. Thank you very much for your attention. Asante sana. All praises to the Most High. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.